Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Welcome to Round Hill Radio. I'm Leslie.
I'm Ed.
Hi, Ed.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we're doing something a little bit different today. I asked Ed if he would be willing to share about his spiritual journey, about his life of ministry, his life of faith, which are obviously intertwined. For those of you who have been listening for a long time, some of you might know us, some of you might not. And I think I don't know all these details of this story, and so I'm personally interested.
I don't even know the details.
And you lived it; you were there.
We'll discover it as we go along.
You're right. Absolutely. So thank you for being willing to do this, first of all. So as they say, let's start at the very beginning.
Alrighty.
A very good place to start.
Yeah.
So the first question, probably pretty obvious to any interviewer, is, was church part of your family life growing up? Because I think that's not always a given.
Right. Yeah, definitely not a given. I think faith was very important to my family because it gave my parents an excuse to send me out of the house for 2 hours on Sunday morning. They never went to church. I went every Sunday. Yeah. And there were actually, I think, two reasons. One, my parents needed time away from me. Thank you very much. I think I was kind of an active child. But the other side of it was my very best friend when I was growing up. So this would have been from kindergarten through fifth grade. His name was Paul, and he was the son of the local Presbyterian pastor. And he and I were best friends throughout our entire school career there, K through 5. So not only did I wind up going to church every Sunday, he and I were in Sunday school together, which met in an amazing space down by the boiler in the basement of the church. It was just the most disgusting place you can imagine. But there we were. That's where we had Sunday school. And in that particular church, Sunday school happened for 1 hour before church so that the children could go up and be in the service through the whole time. Because, of course, we were so excited to hear, something that we had absolutely no understanding of whatsoever for an hour. But the one thing that happened because of that, the pastor's name was Kalman Solyak, and he was a Hungarian refugee. He had fled Hungary in the late 50s. And this man was passionate about justice. Mm-hmm. So and his wife, Catherine, was very passionate about the arts. And lo and behold, those two things became really important to me as I grew up. So I feel like I owe an enormous debt to Catherine and Kalman Solyak. And so that was kind of that's how that worked out. I do want to say something about my family. There was no real explicit religiousness. However, it was interesting. This was in the early days of televangelists. And occasionally my father would listen to a Lutheran pastor on television. And there was a little bit of religion that came through that. And there's a show called Davy and Goliath that I used to watch that was this cute little thing, with, I don't know, puppets or something. I can't even remember clearly. But interestingly enough, that had a kind of a big influence on me. There were sort of religious themes expressed through these characters. So, but the last thing, my mother was so fascinated by science. She was a nurse. She wasn't practicing as a nurse when I was growing up at that point. But the two most important possessions in our house were a microscope and a pair of binoculars. And I think that really had also a huge impact on me in terms of the cultivation of wonder. And so I have always connected religion with wonder. For some people, that's not necessarily the most obvious connection, but for me, it's essential. For religion and imagination, religion and wonder, that's the heart and soul of it. And we were always conducting little experiments, and taking our blood and looking at it under the microscope and all that stuff. So nature became very important to me. So I think I had the two sort of great dimensions of religion, the community aspect of it, but also the personal exploration, just keep asking questions part of it. And
Right.
that really my my background as a child.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I see these through threads in you as a pastor now of nature, of wonder, of art, and of course of faith. So that's so interesting that even it's so long ago,
Isn't it?
that they're still present in your life today. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
So then, as you're starting to get older, was there an element of, because it sounds like maybe faith was something that was sort of all around you, obviously with your friendship. Was it something that then became personal to you, that you started connecting with faith in a more direct way?
Well, the interesting thing that happened out of all this is that when my family moved at the end of my fifth grade career, we entered into a pretty traumatic time. So we had all kinds of upheaval in my house at the time and in my family. So we moved to Massachusetts. I think that my father took early retirement, and the hope was that they were going to settle there and like it there. It didn't work out. We moved back to New York State for a time and then moved to Vermont. So I was in 4 different school systems in 18 months.
Wow.
And the interesting thing, one of the things that came out of that is that religion, formalized religion, community religion, completely dropped out. So I didn't go back to church. I'm not even sure I entered a church again until I was a freshman in college.
Wow.
And that's pretty striking, to have been going almost every week and then it just disappeared. Now, interestingly enough, out of this upheaval, especially when I was a high school teenager, my father became ill. He was diagnosed with cancer and lived for a period of about 16 months with that. He actually returned to community religion at that time by going to a Lutheran church and was befriended by 2 Roman Catholic priests who had come to visit someone else when he was in the hospital, and they struck up a conversation with him and they became good friends. So my father actually returned to religion after having been away from it for a long time. On my side, I left it and I started to read books about Buddhism. And I'm not exactly sure how I was introduced to that. I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I used to go to the little library in Bennington, Vermont, and come home with a stack of books on world religions.
Wow.
I don't even know what started that. But anyway, that got underway. So my perspective was starting to change from being specifically Christian in orientation to the bigger question of, where is the spirit moving? Where do we find it, and how do we look for it, and how does it find us? Those became the questions that preoccupied me for a long time. But it's funny how our paths in the family just went in completely different directions. We were never exactly lined up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I think for so many people, there's perhaps an assumption that people who become pastors, they're raised in very religious households. Everyone goes to church to get, you kind of picture like the Hallmark card version.
Yeah, that wasn't us.
That wasn't you. It wasn't us either. And, I think that's so interesting and important to say, like, nothing's ever a straight line for anybody. Life is not that tidy for even, our faith leaders.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? I have to tell a little story as an aside to that. Down the road, when I finally did go to seminary, I went to Union Theological Seminary in New York City. And we had a wonderful professor there who was from Japan originally. His name was Kozuke Koyama. And he taught world religions. And I really loved that class. That was kind of a return, right, to all of those. Now I finally got to read all of the texts from these sacred religions. But he used to look around the room that we were in at Union, which was like every other classroom, square, like a box. He said, this is not where religion ought to be taught. So he walked us down the hallway at Union. In the entranceway at Union, there is the most gorgeous stairway, and it's a spiral, of course. So it goes up and up and up. And he said, this is where you want to study religion, because it's a spiral. It's not a straight line. And sometimes it can feel like you're repeating yourself, and you're circling back, and you can go up and down this spiral. It's not just always going up. But I loved that. He said, all of our classes ought to take place in the rotunda of Union Theological Seminary, where you can see this spiral going up. So anyway, just a little aside there. Again, not a straight line.
On a straight line. I love that. Yeah. And sometimes the view is the same, but you're on a different level, and you can keep going with that imagery.
I know. It plays itself, right?
It does. It's beautiful. So you mentioned going back to church when you were a freshman in college. What took you there? What prompted you to go?
I wish I could remember. I was a freshman. I actually went my first year in college. I went to Rice University in Houston, Texas. I wanted to get away from home. As it turned out, I really didn't want to get away from home, and I transferred back up north after that first year. But I had a great experience at Rice in Houston. But I got it in my head that I was going to go to Easter worship. By golly, I just thought, like, that is something I need to do. So anyway, I trucked myself over to the local Lutheran church, and I went to Easter morning service, and that was the end of that. I didn't go back to church for another 2 years.
Oh.
I guess a little goes a long way.
You had your fill.
I really did. Must have been an amazing Easter service, right? I just needed a couple of years to think about it. And so, that was it. Again, for me, that I look back at it as in my younger years, it's funny how it was really intense, and then it would stop.
Yeah.
And then it was intense again for a little bit, and then it would stop. But on the edges, I continued to be interested because I've gone back and seen some of my old college papers and noticed that the themes of religion often cropped up. They just never got me into church.
That's so interesting. So you were sort of peripheral around it. Were any of your friends involved in religion at all, or had any sort of faith conversations? Do you remember?
We didn't have many faith conversations, although some of my friends were. And I think one memory that really stands out for me, when we had this really tough period of years when there was a lot of movement going on, at one point we lived across from a Jewish family. This was in Niskayuna, New York, and they had a menorah in their window. And so I asked my mother, I said, what is that? What is that candelabra that they have in the window? I didn't know what to call it, didn't know what it was. And this was typical of my mother. She said, well, let's go over and ask them.
Oh.
And so our neighbor next door, he was a couple of years older than me. He came over. I really still treasure this moment. And he sat down with my mother and me, and he explained Hanukkah and the menorah, and added a couple of other elements, into, it was my first introduction to Judaism. Mm-hmm. And he was just great, and I think it was also impressive to me because he was sort of my age. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like an adult explaining to me, so you sort of expect them to be involved, but he was like another kid.
Yeah.
And that was really touching that he did that. He came over and explained that with such care. So, but again, always kind of looking outside Christianity at the same time as exploring within it. That was important to me.
Yeah. What did you major in college?
American Studies.
What is that?
That is a major that you choose when you can't decide on any other major, and you've got a whole bunch of courses that don't fit, and they will bundle those together very nicely for you and make you an American Studies major. So I really did love American Studies, though, because it gave me this great opportunity to look at the country from all different kinds of perspectives, which I did, interestingly enough, but not so much from a religious standpoint. You would have thought that would have come along, but that didn't. But the great thing about that program was it was interdisciplinary, and that interdisciplinary approach to life as well as religion has stayed with me ever since. So what do the sociologists say? What do the artists say? And I've always wanted to try to check out all the boxes, to see what's happening. So it didn't seem obviously religious, but I think it informed my faith journey in some ways.
Yeah. So I'm trying to do the math, and I'm trying to figure it all out. And where we are now in the story of you in college, you went to an Easter service, And then you going to seminary, which I believe you did fairly young, seems like a big leap. So
you are so right.
so how did we get from where we are now to I'm gonna enter the ministry? What was that? What was that journey?
Isn't that strange? When you think about it. So by the time I was a senior in college, still not much. And then there was an evening program one time. I was at Union College in Schenectady, New York, and there was a sign outside one of the meeting rooms that said free food Sunday night. Okay, I'm on board. Whatever Perfect. That is, I'm going.
Yeah.
It said Campus Protestant Fellowship. I thought, okay, doesn't sound too dangerous. Let's give it a try. And it turned out there were about 9 ministers from the city of Schenectady who came to the campus to start a campus Protestant fellowship. There was a very active Jewish group of students, very active Roman Catholic fellowship, but not anything for Protestant students. And so I started going, and I just got more and more interested in it. And I met a minister, his name was Don Stake, through that. And I started to go up and talk with him. His church was located near the campus. Then I started showing up on Sunday mornings. He started giving me books to read. And it just was like one thing after another. Mm-hmm. I still didn't necessarily think that I was headed for a religious career, that this was going to pan out as someone who was going to become a minister. I was really kind of looking into either getting into a PhD program or I was going to teach. I was looking at a program at Brown University. But things changed in a big, big way when I was a senior in the spring, because I applied for and received a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. And it gave me the opportunity to study overseas, not to study, to travel overseas. Mm. And before that, I had gone to one weekend at Andover Newton Theological School for prospective ministers. I'll go and check this out, see what it is. And I liked what I saw, but I wasn't ready to make a commitment to that at that time. At least I didn't think so. So my Watson Fellowship was designed to give me a chance to travel overseas for a year and kind of do whatever I wanted. I had this program that I wanted to do. And so through a series of just very bizarre circumstances, I wound up serving a church as a student pastor in the northernmost part of Scotland while I was living overseas for a year. It goes to show you that when congregations are really desperate, they'll do anything. So my whole goal of going to Scotland was to live on the coast for a year. I'd always wanted to live in Scotland. I wanted to live on the coast. I had grant money, so I was going to do some youth work in the town. That's what I did in Bennington every summer when I was in college, and Bennington, Vermont. But this one church said, what we really need, our minister is sick and we need somebody to help us preach every single week. And I had never preached in my life. And there was a local minister who said, why don't you give it a try? He said, you're thinking about becoming a minister, right? I mean, it said like it's in the realm of possibility, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, sort of. And he said, well, that's enough to go on. So we gave it a try. And I stayed for a year. So
my gosh.
So when you talk about a big leap, that was the leap.
I'm picturing somebody being like, you're considering possibly learning to swim, right?
Right. Exactly. Here, let me show you this diving board. It's 67 feet off the pool, right? But go ahead. You'll be fine.
Do you remember those early sermons?
Oh, do I ever? Oh my God. Was I ever petrified? And this little church, oh my gosh, it was just such a wonderful place in so many ways. It was right on the coast. I mean, if you went any further north, walking out of the church door, you were in the Pentland Firth of the North Sea. So that was the environment. Wow. But they were so kind to me. That was the amazing thing. They put up with me. And so I did a lot of learning there. And then I came back to the United States after that year. I worked for a year, applied to Union Seminary, and eventually went to seminary. So I
Wow.
kind of did it the wrong way around. I started in the church first, then went to the seminary. But the great advantage to that is one person said, well, you'll know what you want to study and what you don't want to study by the time you get to seminary, which turned out to be true. That was really very helpful in that sense. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that's actually a perfect spot to leave our conversation for today. We anticipated this being a two-parter due to the rich history we would get into. So we will leave you with your imagination of Ed, a young man about to enter seminary, and we will pick back up here next week. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you here next week.
Blessings to all.
Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.